This morning, I am going to be attempting to connect my watch to that computer, to that screen, because of some technical difficulties that we had earlier. So if you see me up here looking at my watch, I'm not trying to tell myself to hurry up or anything like that. I'll be watching for Brian for that. Or it could be saying your watch isn't working. You're not changing the slides. So we'll see what we can do. This morning I want to talk about valleys and, by extension, mountains as well. But sometimes we focus more on the valleys than we do the mountains. And so what I want to do is spend a little time to talk about life, because life is hard. I mean, we have all these things that come up in our lives, and I just know from talking and meeting with you guys and being a part of your lives that many of you, all of us, are struggling with difficulties. And I know that life has, kicked us in the rump a few times, and that we've experienced loss, we've experienced failure, we've experienced the death of family members, we've experienced the loss of jobs, and we've experienced all kinds of things that seems like it just knocks us down and kicks us around, and life is just hard sometimes. And it's kind of easy for us to see that in other people and feel sorry for them and have compassion and sympathy, but when it hits us, dude, it's a totally different story, isn't it? All of a sudden it's like, wow, what did I do to deserve this? And sometimes we start looking at God maybe even in a questioning light. And why would you do this to me, God? Why would you put me in a position? Man, I have served you and I'm trying my best and I've done nothing wrong. And we start looking at it in a fairness view, like, this isn't fair to me. Why am I suffering through this? And first off, I want to say that that's healthy. I think that we need to be asking those questions. God understands, right? God, in His Son's presence, walked amongst us, right? And He suffered so much more than any of us ever will. He walked a mile in our shoes and then some. So He knows what kind of struggles that we go through. And it's not that we deserve it. I mean, sometimes we have examples in Scriptures where they're walking by this guy who's maimed or blind or whatever, and the disciples go, so was it his sin or his daddy's sin that got him in that position? And Jesus was like, it's neither. See, we're in a fallen world. We are in a world that exists the way it is because of Adam's decision in the garden that ultimately got them kicked out of paradise. We're no longer in paradise. It's gone. But that doesn't mean life has to completely be horrible, because we have something new. We have something else. We have hope. We have faith. We have someone we can hold on to. And hopefully, if we found a church family, a group of people that we can also rally around us and pick us up and help us. I thought of it in terms of valleys and mountains because there's something inside of me that sees myself as a mountain climber, though I've very rarely been on a mountain. I just have this desire to climb a mountain, right? When in 2007 we went to did a Holy Land tour, and we went to Mount Sinai, and Kevin and I and several of the other guys did a expedition up Mount Sinai. And it was hours, and it was grueling, and it was cold, and it was strenuous, but it was awesome at the same time. Like, I took pictures all the way up and down, and I've got pictures of the camels and the people and even the rest stops. And I remember at one point, we started this at 1 a.m., because we wanted to make it to the top by sunrise so we could watch the sunrise from the mount. And we're struggling to get up this mountain, and we've been on the mountain probably an hour, maybe two, and one of us asked our guide, "How much further is it?" And the guide goes, "You see that light way up there?" "Yes, that's halfway." So it was like, okay. So we just knew it was going to be hard. But when we got to the top, and those last 700 steps are 2 feet high apiece, just rocks that they have set aside to make a staircase. 700 of those, and you're just wearing yourself out to get to the top. But when you finally got there, and it was freezing cold, and we're all bundled up, and we're watching the west and looking for the sunrise. And when it came over the horizon, it just shot rays all over. It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful sunrise I have ever encountered. And a group of people, they were Asian of some sort, I don't know, because they started singing "How Great Thou Art" in some Asian language. But it was the most beautiful rendition of that hymn I ever heard because of the experience and because of what was going on. And I think that life is a lot like that, right? I mean, you're in the valley and you're struggling and you've got blisters on your feet and you've realized you've put the wrong pair of socks on this morning for this work that you're doing. You're realizing that, this is harder than I wanted it to be. This is harder than I expected. I should have paid that guy to ride that camel up the mountain instead of me trying to hike up myself. But I think that life is richer because of the pains that we go through. And the scriptures even give us that indication that these struggles have purpose. And these struggles mold us and build us into something better than we were before. It draws us closer to Christ. And if you think about sanctification is about getting to Christ, being like Him. And think about what He went through. It was no walk in the park for Him. It was tough. But if we want to be like Him, maybe we have to suffer just a little bit in order to grow. There's a song that I absolutely love, and I'm kind of basing... Melanie, can you hit the space bar? My watch decided it didn't want to do this. Okay, so there's a song that I absolutely love that talks to this. And these lyrics have really affected me at times, especially when I find myself struggling. And it starts out, it says, "I'm starting to realize that I can do nothing on my own. That everything that I start to build crumbles into nothing. It's safe to say that no matter what I try, I fall so short. This unrelenting pride continues to widen the space between you and I." And he's talking to God. Now I'm stopping and thinking for a minute. When I was reading this guy's lyrics as he was expressing this, and I'm thinking, he says, he's admitting his failures. He's admitting his low inability to do things. But then he turns around and he says, this unrelenting pride continues to widen the space between you and I. Now when we think of pride, what do we think about? Oh, I'm better than you. Oh, I'm so good. Hey, look at me. That's what we think of whenever we say pride. But pride, there's different flavors of pride. And one flavor of pride is just simple selfishness. Focusing on yourself more than other people. And look how he's equating that. I'm so focused on myself. I think I can do this. I expected to be able to do this. I expected to build this. But I'm realizing now that prideful thought in my mind that I'm going to be able to do this and accomplish this was pride. And now I'm realizing I can do nothing on my own. I'm lost. And everything that I'm trying to build is crumbling right in front of my eyes. He says, but that pride widens the space between you and me, God, because I think I can do it on my own. And if I think I can do it on my own, well, then I don't need you quite as much. You see, if life is great for us here, if it's just a bed of roses, are you ever reaching out to God? Maybe it takes a little pain. Maybe it takes a little understanding that you can't do it on your own before you actually fall on your knees and go, "Dear God, I need you." And I think that's kind of where we're getting at here. There's a story in the Old Testament I want to make quick reference to. We've talked about it a time or two here before, and that is the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal and dealing with them at Mount Carmel and all this. And he had this great success there, right? He's like having this moment where he poses a challenge to the prophets of Baal and says, all right, we're going to find out who's God's the real God. Now remember, Israel has fallen into paganism. They're under King Ahab, Queen Jezebel, horrible rulers, pagan worshipers who are worshiping Baal. And everybody's on Baal's side except for Elijah, right? He's all by himself. And he says, look, let's do this and let's see whose God is real. Let's set up 2 altars, or let's take this altar but put all this sacrifice on it. And then first, you Baal guys, you gather around and you get Baal to light it on fire. And then I'll take my turn. Well, he does all this, and they're going crazy, cutting themselves and all this, and Elijah's kind of making fun of them. He's like, hey, where is Baal? Where is he at? He hadn't come down. Maybe he's using the bathroom. It actually says that. He's like, maybe he's on a journey. Maybe and he's just making fun of them the whole time. And he says, you know what? Throw some water on that. Yeah, let's douse it down. Let's stack this deck. And he does that. And then he calls out, O Lord God of Israel. And he says, light this on fire so that everyone will know you are God. And the fire came down from heaven, consumed the sacrifice, licked up every drop of water that he put on it. An amazing thing, right? A victory for a great man of God, right? But then Jezebel says, let's kill this Elijah guy. I mean, this is ridiculous, And so he flees. And he enters into this point to where he was on the mountain there, literally. He was on Mount Carmel when all that happened. And now he's like, what else can I do, God? And that's really what he's thinking, right? He goes and he hides in the wilderness. And now he's in the valley. And he's like, what do you want from me, God? I just want everyone to love you the way I do. I just want everyone to accept you. And that was the most impressive thing that we could have done. And no one cared. No one changed. Nobody reacted to it. And of course, he went into a funk, right? And I'll get my slide there. So in 1 Kings 19, he's dealing with this. And he's in a cave. And God comes to him. It says he went into the cave there and spent the night. And all of a sudden, the Lord spoke to him. Why are you here, Elijah? And he answered, I have been absolutely loyal to the Lord, the sovereign God. And even though the Israelites have abandoned the agreement they made with you, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, I alone am left. And now they want to take my life. And the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. Look, the Lord is ready to pass by. Now, he's talking literally. He's talking physically. Go up into that mountain because the Lord, Yahweh in the original language, is about to walk by. And you need to see this. You need to be there whenever he comes by. That is what he's telling us too when we're in the valley. Get up the mountain, child. Climb the mountain because the Lord's ready to pass by and you have to witness it. You get to experience it. So climb the mountain. Get out of the valley. So he does this. It says he was on the mountain there and he's waiting on the Lord to pass by. And a very powerful wind went before the Lord, digging into the mountain and causing landslides, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the windstorm there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire there was a soft whisper. Or as the King James says, a still small voice. And what does it say to him? He says the exact same thing he already asked him. Right? He already experienced the Lord in the cave. And he went up this mountain to expect this big thing to happen. But the Lord wasn't in any of the big things that happened. He was in this small voice that just asked him the exact same question it was asking him in the valley. Why are you here? What is your purpose? And his response was the same. And God told him, take heart, because there's over 7,000 people still in Israel who love me. You just don't know them yet. I need you to get out there, get out of the valley, get out of the cave, and go to work. Because there's work that is needed and there are people. You're not alone. There are others. You need to go to work. And one of the messages he's sending here by sending the earthquake and the landslides and the windstorms and all of that and the fire was to prove a point. Big things happened at Mount Carmel. Powerful things happened at Mount Carmel. Fire came down from heaven. The most impressive display of God's holiness happened at Mount Carmel. But nothing happened. No one responded. Sometimes the Lord doesn't necessarily speak through big events. He speaks to you personally in a soft way and encourages and lifts you up. And that is the point that he wanted to make there. Let's continue with our song lyrics from this song called Valleys. He says, is there any point in trying to change? No matter what I do, it always stays the same. But I feel like this has been made for me. Is there something more that I can't see? Have we ever been in that place where we're asking ourselves that question? Is there a point in going on? Is there a point in trying any harder? Because I'm trying as hard as I can and nothing is helping and nothing is getting better. But I felt like I was made for this. I feel like I'm supposed to be here. Is there something I'm missing? Is there something that I just can't see? He says, all I want is to let go. I try so hard, but the pride still grows. Just for once to breathe in deep and catch a glimpse of what you see in me. So many years of sorrow and grief, the bitterness I tasted in the face of defeat. How can I forget the joy of the mountain down in the valley? How do we do that? It's pretty easy, actually. We forget the joy of the mountaintops when we're down in the valley. Whenever I think back to sitting there on the summit of Mount Sinai, watching that beautiful sunrise, it doesn't hold quite as much weight when I'm back down on the trail again, this time going downhill, and gravity is working against you the entire way, and your knees are killing you, and your feet are killing you, you have blisters the size of quarters. You almost forget it at that time. At that moment, when the pain is there, you're forgetting the joy of the mountaintop. But the joy of the mountaintop is still there. There's a verse that I'm going to use it slightly out of context, but that's okay because it's still there underlined. There's still an underlying point here. So in Romans 7, you've heard me use this before, but this is the end of this chapter where Paul is talking about his struggle with sin. Now, going back to the author of the song, he's equating his inability to see what God's goal is because of his own pride. Right? And pride is sin. So in a way, this verse does fit that exactly, but it also has bigger implications. So Paul is talking about how he struggles and the things that he wants to do, he's not doing. And the things he doesn't want to do, those are the things he is doing. And at the end of this, he comes to a conclusion here in Romans 7, verse 21. He says, "So I have learned this rule. When I want to do good, evil is there with me. In my mind, I am happy with God's law. But I see another law working in my body, which makes war against the law that my mind accepts. That other law working in my body is the law of sin, and it makes me its prisoner." Okay? So what he's saying here is there's two things that can't exist in the same space. There's this law of God, this holiness, this great law of the Spirit. We have the Spirit within us. And this beautiful thing, which is God within us. But at the same time, I'm trapped in this flesh and these desires and these worries and this lack of faith and all these things. This pride is here with me. And I'm having to deal with that too. In the next verse he says, "Oh wretched man that I am, who's going to save me from this predicament that I'm in?" And he admits that Jesus is the only way to bridge the gap. You see, there's two laws, and the best way to try and get your head around this is an analogy that I've seen before, where you're talking about there's two laws physically here on the earth that we deal with. One of them is the law of gravity. Okay, you have no choice but to obey the law of gravity. Okay, there's no getting around that one. And you might think that, hey, I'm going to try as hard as I can to defy gravity when I step off this cliff. But it won't work. You're going to obey that law. It's there, it drags you to the ground no matter what. But there is another law. There is the law of aerodynamics. Now, the law of aerodynamics says this: you get a big enough wingspan and you get up enough energy and enough speed, you can circumvent this law of gravity. You can overcome it and you can fly. You can soar above the ground and do something that you can't do by yourself. This is very similar to what Paul's talking about here. This law of gravity is much like this law of the flesh. You can't get away from it. It's there. It's part of you. It will drag you down into the valley over and over and over again. But there is another law, a law of the Spirit, which can transcend that, which can bring you up out of the valleys, which can allow you to actually fly. Now, we know that airplanes can't perpetually stay in the air, right? Because we run out of fuel. We run out of conditions that allow for safe flying. So what happens? That plane eventually has to come back down because law of gravity still works. The key is refuel your engine, get back onto the runway, and take off again. It does nobody any good to park it in the hangar. But sometimes that's what we feel like. Is there any point in going on? Is there any point in trying? We start asking those questions instead of actually using the Spirit that we have been given through Christ to overcome these low times in our life. In Philippians 3, verses 12 through 14, the Apostle Paul says, "Not that I have already obtained this," talking about perfection, or am already perfect, "but I press on to make it my own, because Christ Jesus has made me His own. Brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own. But one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus." Do you hear the attitude that Paul is expressing here? Stop and think about what this guy's been through. He has been stoned. He's been in shipwrecks. He listed in 2 Corinthians, if you're ever interested to see how much he went through. And of course, he lays my favorite one that he adds to the end of theirs is, above all this, the care of these churches. It's like the biggest thing, whatever that's afflicting him. But he says here, even though all these problems are happening, here's what I'm going to do. And this is the only thing I can do. Forget what's in the past. Move forward. Dwelling in the past doesn't help anything. It doesn't fix anything. Take your lumps and go forward. Continue. No matter how painful that next step is. No matter how steep that climb is before you, you have to take that next step because Jesus is there. And He's already given us the salvation that we don't have to work for that anymore, right? That's been given to us. So just move on and don't wallow in the pain. You know, there's a guy that we're familiar with in the Scriptures, the Apostle Peter. Now, Peter went through all kinds of valleys and mountains. And very quickly, I might add, he was a very emotional guy, right? And in fact, there's one point in Matthew 16 where they go to Caesarea Philippi. And Peter has a mountain moment. You're the Son of God. Jesus goes, amen, you nailed it. And it's not just you talking, that's the Spirit talking through you. And because of this, you are Peter. You are a rock, right? Next chapter, first couple of verses. Get behind me, Satan. That's what he told Peter. Peter says, no, you're not going to go to Jerusalem and get sacrificed. And Jesus goes, get behind me, Satan. He went from being called the rock to being called a tool that Satan's using to try and tempt Jesus, right? So you have this up and down in his life. And, you know, as we've said up here before, he's a great example for us because he's so human. He is so flawed. And that's amazing to us, right? Because we can relate to that because we know that our flaws. Well, there's one point where, I'll come to this in a second. Let's continue going through our lyrics here for a minute. And in the midst of struggles of finding the man that you called me to be, your love reminds me that though I am broken, I am still standing. I'm still screaming. And I will have the choice to say there is more to this life that I'm living. See, where's the key? Through your love, God. That's how I know that even though I'm broken, even though I've been in pain, even though I've lost those I love, even though I've lost this position at work, or though I failed my exam, or though whatever affliction, that test result came back negative from the hospital, or whatever it is, because of your love, I know I'm still standing. Even if I'm on my back, I know inside here with you, I'm still standing. I'm still screaming about this. I'm still passionate about it. There's more to this life that I'm living. So now going back to Peter, there is an event that happens here where Peter is in the boat with his disciples and it's storming and it's crazy and all this stuff. And he looks out and he sees Jesus there on the water. And a mountain moment happens. Peter's like, if that's you, Lord, well, you can call me out there with you. And what does he say? He said, come. Peter jumped out of the boat. Now, stop and think about how this is playing out. Peter is not even really thinking about it, is he? He's just like acting and impulsive and sure thing, Lord. And he just throws his legs over the boat like it's no big deal. But can you imagine what it felt like whenever he hit solid ground on that top of that water and realized, hey, this is going to work. It says, and he walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind, he became afraid. And starting to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him, saying, you of little faith, why did you doubt? when they went up into the boat, the wind ceased. See, whenever he got into Jesus' arms, that's when the wind ceased. What is his valley moment here in this story? It's the wind, and it's the waves, and it's the reality that this is life. And all of a sudden, I'm looking around going, I can't do this. I'm not capable of this. And my faith starts to waver. And all of a sudden, I start sinking, even though the Lord, the Son of God, is standing not even a foot away from me. Right there in front of me, in front of my eyes, I can physically see Him. Even though that's happening, I'm still losing my faith. Now think about this from our point of view. We don't have the luxury of putting eyes on Jesus, standing on the water, right there next to us the way Peter did. And yet his faith was failing. Our faith will fail even more so when we reach these valleys and when the struggles start happening. But the reality is, Jesus is right there. He is right in front of you. And all you have to do is reach up and grab Him. And guess what He's saying? The exact same thing to you that He's saying to Peter. Where is your faith? Why did you doubt? I'm right here. Come, let me hold you so that the wind will cease. You know, we have to remember when we're in these valleys that there is a mountaintop. And there's joy at the mountaintop. And if we are with Him, and if we are putting our faith in Him, He will take us to this triumphant point where we can stand there on the summit and see the glory of God surrounding us. In Romans 5, verses 3 through 5, Paul also says, not only this, but we also rejoice in sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts through the Holy Spirit who was given to us. He comes right out and says, you know what? These painful moments, these things you have to go through, the suffering that you feel, they produce good things. They produce endurance. You know, they produce hope in you. And that is where He wants you, to be hopeful and to be willing to reach up out of that water and stop sinking, but instead start climbing that mountain with Him. And you know what? We are all in this mountain climb together. I don't know if you've ever watched mountain climbers at work, but they'll especially if it's a really hard climb, right? You've got the one guy, he will kind of take the lead this time, and he'll go up the mountain a little ways, and he'll nail a spike into the side of the mountain and tie a rope to it and drop it. Why? So that his buddy down here has an easier climb and has some safety. And then they'll take turns, and he'll go up to the next space and put a nail in there and let a rope down. And before long, you're strapped with these ropes. And you know that even if you slip and fall, you're tied to something. And that you're not going to go all the way down. You might lose a little bit, but you're not going to fall all the way down. It's teamwork. And even though Jesus is reaching down to help us up, at the same time, we're underneath here pushing up, right? We need to make sure and take care of one another as well. In Galatians 6, he says, those of you who are strong in the Spirit, you need to go to those that you see fall and pick them back up. You need to love them, and you need to bear their burdens. So really, this is what it means to be a human, really. Because we're all going to be in those valleys from time to time. The trick is, are we going to stay in the valley? Or are we going to climb out of there with Jesus guiding us and with our friends by our sides?